I'm gonna play 3 clips for you, and I want you to tell me what you see. Here's the first one.
Wow. Still trying to swing against it. Medium punch, but now an FU.
Here's the second.
Fouled, but he's the one on the offensive situation until the ending Walker sweep comes
And
out.
here's the last one.
Not even gonna go for the side switch. I like that. Give me that launcher.
Yeah, get some screen.
If you couldn't see what's going on here, this video is for you. The common element in all 3 of these clips is delay. Delay is a tool that everyone uses and no one talks about. It's practical on defense, practical on offense, and practical in neutral too. The aim of this video is to define delay as a malleable tool you can begin applying to all facets of your game plan. We'll discuss where we can use it as well as how, and by the end of this video, you'll have a solid grasp on the fundamental concept of delay, as well as an understanding of how you can begin applying it. But firstly, let's start with the definition. Hello.
Yo,
Do you guys want to run a fantasy league?
bro, bitte, I'm not destroying every single one of you here.
Ja, bitte, Bro.
The term delay simply means to wait a certain number of frames before executing any given action. This number of frames, which we'll refer to as the amount of delay, is arbitrary and can be any quantity that isn't 0. If you're experienced in Street Fighter 6 or any fighting game for that matter, you've likely been using delay in a few areas already, such as delay teching. However, the definition here is quite broad because so is the application. We can delay anything and everything, from our meaties to our mashes to our shimmies. If it's an option you can make in a fighting game, you can delay it. Delay is ubiquitous, therefore the sooner you can understand the breadth of its utility, the sooner you can begin experimenting with and mastering its use. Before we talk about the whens and hows of delay, I need to emphasize to you just how strong it is. For the sake of this example, we'll be incredibly hyperbolic. Imagine yourself in a match, and every time you press a button, tech, DI, or simply do anything, your opponent presses a jab exactly 1 frame before your action and counter hits you. If this were the case, you would simply lose the game with no counterplay. Now, you may be thinking, he isn't delaying, he's just pressing before me. And to that I say, he's not pressing before you, he's delaying right up until you commit to an option. Obviously, this is an incredibly unrealistic example, but you can use it to imagine how strong delaying options can be. If your timing is right, your opponent will get hit every single time, and nothing is stronger than preventing your opponent from doing anything over the course of a match. A tool such as this, when mastered, can be unbeatable on defense and terrifying on offense. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. You're likely already wondering, how do I time my delays correctly? Which is a valid question, but first we need to discuss where we can use delay. Now that we have a solid understanding of the fundamental concept of delay, we can dive into the finer details of using it. As mentioned previously, anything can be delayed, and this is nowhere more important than in neutral. The psychology of delaying your buttons, your walk-ups, and your projectiles in neutral is a topic unfortunately far beyond the scope of this video, and so we won't be discussing the neutral game here. You can, however, take the concepts discussed in this video and begin theorizing their applications in the neutral game, and in the future I will be making a video on this topic. But for now, with our sights set on offense and defense, let's start with where we use delay. There are 3 key intents we can choose from when we delay our options, and those are to counter our opponent's timing, to bait our opponent to press, and to OS against certain options. Each of these can be applied to both defense and offense, some stronger in one context than the other, and mastery of these techniques involves not only understanding their core idea, but also where best to utilize them. The simplest to understand is countering our opponent's timing. Commonly, in SF6, you'll fight against opponents using delays themselves, such as delaying their throw techs on defense or delaying their mashes on our offense. This method beats both, and its execution is simple. To counter your opponent's delay, you simply delay your own option. Sometimes only a little delay is necessary, and sometimes you'll really find yourself waiting a substantial amount of time before pressing. The exact fine-tuning of the amount of delay will be covered later, but understanding how your delay can beat our opponent's delay is the most essential component of using delay. This technique applies to offense and defense. If you're delay teching, your opponent might start delaying their meaties, and if your opponent is the one delay teching, you can start delaying your meaties to beat them out. This back and forth delay battle on offense and defense continues until the optimal choice is to simply not delay your option at all. A throw tech delayed by too many frames won't even beat an immediate throw anymore. This to and fro is the backbone of high level offense and is by far the most important idea to comprehend when talking about delay. The next intent we have is baiting our opponent to press. This one works because, simply put, if we're in a match and I get plus frames, then I walk up to you, what would you do? Regardless of what you might reason here, in that moment what you and likely 90% of the people watching this will subconsciously do is to expect a throw and throw tech, or jab to interrupt my approach. In both of these situations, instead of pressing a button to take advantage of our plus frames, we delay our button while walking up. The result of this is we bait our opponent to react in some way and open them up as a consequence of it. If you'd like to deepen your knowledge on your subconscious mind and learn what the self 1 and self 2 is, you can check out my video on the topic here. This technique leans heavier towards offense, as it's most effective in situations where not only do you have an advantage, but you've already established a threat of strike to ensure our opponent is initially blocking. It does have some minor utility on defense, such as when you have a read your opponent will block on their Oki, effectively making you plus. However, learning to apply this tool in an offensive context is much more essential. The last technique, and likely the one you've already been implementing, is to OS against certain options. Most of you watching this likely know what an OS is, but for those who don't, an option select, or OS, is a situation where performing the same inputs can lead to several different outcomes depending on how the characters interact. The simplest example is the delay tech. By delaying our throw tech just a few frames on our wake up, we can simultaneously defend against a meaty strike and an immediate throw. The delay here ensures that firstly we block any immediate attack and abuse the fact that throw techs have a few frames of leniency to defend against the throw. This option is often referenced in the context of defense, and for good reason. Delaying a jab can take your turn while blocking a meaty, and the previously mentioned delay tech can cover two of the RPS options, those being strike and throw. However, don't underestimate this technique's effectiveness on offense. For example, a delay meaty can protect you against reversals while simultaneously exerting pressure on your opponent. This particular type of delay is relatively simple but incredibly effective as a tactic for risk-averse play. In situations where you don't know your opponent well or fear their unpredictability, delaying buttons on your offense can keep yourself safe against their wild plays. At the beginning of this chapter, I stated that we would cover the where and the how. With the three main wheres discussed, now we need to talk about how. Unfortunately, this part is significantly harder. Obviously, we all know how to delay a button, but the key here is identifying and executing the correct amount of delay. This amount ultimately boils down to who our opponent is, how they might be feeling, their playstyle, and a plethora of other factors. A simple and solid piece of advice when deciding how much to delay is to just trust your gut. Experiment, practice, and build a mental dictionary of how different players present their options, and if you play certain opponents frequently, keep a mental note on their playstyle. Eventually, you'll build an innate gut feeling on how much you should be delaying based on your opponent, and this feeling will only become stronger with time. The astute among you might be wondering, however, which button do we delay? There actually is a significant difference between delaying a heavy and delaying a light, for example, and choosing the right button is almost as important as choosing the right amount of delay. Generally speaking, the slower the button, the bigger the risk. Let's take Ken's standing heavy punch and crouching light punch. If we look at the frames, we can see that the light attack, with only 4 startup frames, leaves us vulnerable for 3 frames. The heavy punch, conversely, leaves us vulnerable for 9 frames, 6 more than the light attack. In practice, this means the slower the button, the longer we leave ourselves open, the higher the chance we may be interrupted. Of course, however, should the heavy punch hit, we can convert to much more damage than a light attack, and so we can start to see the balance. The bigger the button, the higher the risk, the higher the reward. Choosing the right button and the right amount of delay is difficult, but as mentioned earlier, your gut is your best judge, and you should experiment with how your specific character's tools can be delayed. With enough time and practice, you can construct a strong level 1 game plan involving delay that you can take into matches when appropriate. For this final section, we'll go through some different examples with different characters applying the techniques discussed in the previous chapter. I want to counter my opponent's delay. Here, we want to counter our opponent's delay tech, which they're inputting on our drive rushes to option select a strike and a throw. To do so, we simply delay our follow-up and catch them with a counter hit for huge damage. An example on defense here, our opponent is delaying their Oki to try and OS against the reversal. They want to wait and then do walk up throw. We can beat this option as well as an immediate meaty by utilizing a delay jab. I want to bait my opponent to press. After Cammy's crouching heavy punch, our opponents might be unsure whether to expect a strike or a throw. We can abuse this uncertainty, delay another crouching heavy punch, and catch them flustered committing to a button. Don't forget that in burnout, a lot of buttons become plus, such as Ryu's standing medium punch being +3. We can abuse our frame advantage here to again stretch our offense and eventually catch our opponents flustered. I want to OS certain options. In this example, we're on defense being pressured with a drive rush jab mix-up. We can delay a low button here to catch a shimmy while blocking the strike, allowing us to OS between the two options. Let's just hope our opponent doesn't delay, countering our delay. Lastly, under the threat of throw, we want to force our opponent to guess in this corner situation. We can use delay to simultaneously option select against a tech or a backdash, two throw beating options our opponent might be inclined to choose. Delay is everywhere. You probably delayed watching this video. If you want to make it to the upper echelons of the competitive world of Street Fighter 6, delay is one of the many tools you need to learn, and I hope this video has outlined the path to mastery. It's important to again remember that the delay minigame is incredibly reliant on your opponent. It's a yin and yang, and honing your ability to identify the correct amount of delay requires experience upon experience. I hope this video was useful. If you enjoyed or maybe learned something, don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.